Complementary therapies, such as those practiced by naturopaths, chiropractors and acupuncturists have become increasingly popular in Australia over the last few decades. Interest initially coincided with enthusiasm for alternative lifestyles, while immigration and increased contact and trade with China have also had an influence. The status of complementary therapies is being revisited in a number of areas: legal regulation, the stances of doctors' associations, their inclusion in medical education, and scientific research into their efficacy. With the exception of acupuncture, complementary therapies are not routinely funded through Medicare, so there is little administrative data regarding their use. However, the ABS has some data about the use of complementary therapies which can help inform discussion. For many first-year students, the university may be their first experience living away from home for an extended period of time. It is a definite break from home. In my point of view, this is the best thing that you can do. I know you have to fend for yourself, cook and clean after yourself, basically look after yourself without your parents, but the truth is, sometime in your life you are going to have to part with lovely mummy and daddy. But they are only just a phone call away, and it is really good to have some quality time without them. The first few weeks can be a lonely period. There may be concerns about forming friendship. When new students look around, it may seem that everyone else is self-confident and socially successful. The reality is that everyone is having the same concerns. You learn various social skills. You have to get along with your roommates. Living with them can present special, sometimes intense, problems. Negotiating respect of personal property, personal space, sleep, and relaxation needs can be a complex task. The complexity increases when roommates are of different backgrounds with very different values. It is unrealistic to expect that roommates will be best friends. Meaningful, new relationships should not be expected to develop overnight. It took a great deal of time to develop intimacy in high school friendships. The same will be true of intimacy in university friendships. An eccentric mix of English, German and French has entered Japanese usage with grand abandon. A career woman is a career woman, and a mansion is an apartment. This increasing use of katakana, or unique Japanese versions of Western words, and the younger generation's more casual use of the Japanese language have prompted Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi to worry that these new words may not be understood by a wider audience. As a result, a government panel is proposing to publish a manual on how to speak proper Japanese. Foreign words became katakana Japanese because no existing Japanese words could quite capture a specific meaning or feeling. The Romans glorified the bravery shown in the arena, but trivialized the events and degraded the participants. Mosaic pictures of executions and combats, graphically violent to our eyes, were displayed in the public rooms and even dining rooms in the homes of wealthy Romans. How can the viewer today possibly understand such images? Until fairly recently, modern authors writing about the arena minimized its significance and represented the institutionalized violence as a sideline to Roman history. The tendency was also to view the events through our own eyes and to see them as pitiful or horrifying, although to most Romans empathy with victims of the arena was inconceivable. In the past, few decades, however, scholars have started to analyze the complex motivations for deadly public entertainments and for contradictory views of gladiators as despised, yet beloved hero slaves. From a child's point of view, what is the purpose of TV advertising? Is advertising on TV done to give actors the opportunity to take a rest or practice their lines? Or is it done to make people buy things? Furthermore, is the main difference between programs and commercials that commercials are for real, whereas programs are not, or that programs are for kids and commercials for adults? As has been shown several times in the literature, e.g. Butter et al. 1981, Donahue, Henk, and Donahue 1980, Macklin 1983 and 1987, Robertson and Rossiter 1974, Stevens and Stutz 1982, some children are able to distinguish between programs and commercials and are aware of the intent of TV advertising, whereas others are not. Allergies are abnormal immune system reactions to things that are typically harmless to most people. When you're allergic to something, your immune system mistakenly believes that this substance is harmful to your body. Substances that cause allergic reactions such as certain foods, dust, plant pollen, or medicines are known as allergens. In an attempt to protect the body, the immune system produces the antibodies to that allergen. Those antibodies then cause certain cells in the body to release chemicals into the bloodstream, one of which is histamine. The histamine then acts on the eyes, nose, throat, lungs, skin, or gastrointestinal tract and causes the symptoms of the allergic reaction. Future exposure to that same allergen will trigger this antibody response again. This means that every time you come into contact with that allergen, you'll have some form of allergy symptoms. Descendants of the Maya living in Mexico still sometimes refer to themselves as the corn people. The phrase is not intended as metaphor. Rather, it's meant to acknowledge their abiding dependence on this miraculous grass, the staple of their diet for almost 9,000 years. For an American like me, growing up linked to a very different food chain, yet one that is also rooted in corn, not to think of himself as a corn person suggests either a failure of imagination or a triumph of capitalism. Or perhaps a little of both. For the great edifice of variety and choice that is an American supermarket rests on a remarkably narrow biological foundation, corn. It's not merely the feed that the steers and the chickens and the pigs and the turkeys ate. It's not just the source of the flour and the oil and the leavenings, the glycerides and coloring in the processed foods. What is a country, and how is a country defined? When people ask how many countries there are in the world, they expect a simple answer. After all, we've explored the whole planet, we have international travel, satellite navigation and plenty of global organizations like the United Nations, so we should really know how many countries there are. However, the answer to the question varies according to whom you ask. Most people say there are 192 countries, but others point out that there could be more like 260 of them. So why isn't there a straightforward answer? The problem arises because there isn't a universally agreed definition of country, and because, for political reasons, some countries find it convenient to recognize or not recognize other countries. The precise relationship between fiction and life has been debated extensively. Most modern critics agree that, whatever its apparent factual content or verisimilitude, fiction is finally to be regarded as a structured imitation of life and should not be confused with a literal transcription of life itself. While fiction is a work of the imagination rather than reality, it can also be based closely on real events, sometimes experienced by the author. In a work of fiction, the author is not the same as the narrator, the voice that tells the story. Authors maintain a distance from their characters. Sometimes that distance is obvious, for instance, if a male writer tells a story from the point of view of a female character. Other times it is not so obvious, especially if we know something of the author's life and there are clear connections between the story and the author's life.
A conventional sales is when the home is owned outright, or the seller owes less on the mortgage than fair market value. Conventional sales involve quicker transactions between both parties, unlike foreclosures, short sales, and probate sales. We typically recommend conventional sales for our buyers, especially first-time homebuyers, to help them avoid the complications they could run into when dealing with distressed properties or probate sales. For a majority of buyers who are looking to purchase and move into their dream home as soon as possible, conventional sales are the way to go. Oftentimes, distressed properties can take many months for the seller's bank to approve an offer, or for a court date to be set in the case of a probate sale.
The first printed books began to appear during the second quarter of the last century. The earliest examples were put together in a number of different ways, sometimes leaving space for decorations and ornate capitals to be added by miniaturist painters, and sometimes 71 containing handwritten text alongside printed illustrations. Most of them had texts and pictures printed entirely from wood blocks, which is how they got the name, block books. Printing was normally done on separate leaves which were then bound together in book form. The obvious advantage of having printed text and visual images together on one sheet was quickly grasped by monks, who saw its potential as a means of spreading knowledge, and as an economic and effective way to get their message across to a wide audience. The monasteries, however, by no means had a monopoly on the production and sale of woodcut printing. In fact, probably the most profitable area of European printmaking was the production of playing cards. Nonetheless, the content of most surviving block books is essentially biblical. Our sense of cinema as a site of commercial entertainment can be traced back to the Lumiere brothers. In December 1895 they attracted a fee-paying public in Paris to sit and watch flickering images on an illuminated screen. The commercial Pandora's box they opened was to blossom in a few years into a world cinema industry and, at its peak, the fantastical Hollywood. Yet in the 30 years in which this miraculous construction was accomplished, audiences rarely had to listen to films, only watch them. Hence, the early decades of cinema were characterized by the title, silent. In fact, there was a lot of noise, machinery, audiences, musicians, and commentators. Even so, the absence of the human voice and dialogue make the films seem rather strange when viewed by a modern audience. In any given population, about 10% of the people are left-handed, and this figure remains relatively stable over time. So-called handedness runs in families, but what causes it and why the proportion of left-handed to right-handed people is a constant are still a mystery. One thing we do know is that hand dominance is related to brain asymmetry. And it seems to be generally agreed that the human brain is profoundly asymmetric, and that understanding how this works will tell us much about who we are and how our brains work. Brain function is distributed into the left and right hemispheres, and this is crucial for understanding language, thought, memory, and perhaps even creativity. For right-handed people, language activity is mainly on the left side. Many left-handers also have left-side language dominance, but a significant number may have language either more evenly distributed in both hemispheres or else predominantly on the right side of the brain. Zika is more pernicious than public health officials anticipated. At present, it is circulating in more than 50 countries. And as of mid-May, 7 countries or territories have reported cases of microcephaly or other serious birth defects linked to the virus, which is transmitted by mosquito bites, blood transfusion or sexual contact with an infected human. It can also be passed from mother to fetus during pregnancy. Despite Zika's vast range over almost 70 years, there is little genetic difference among the various strains, according to an analysis by researchers at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. For example, the strain currently in the Americas and another previously detected French Polynesia are practically indistinguishable from each other group in white box. Every day, on television, on the radio, and in the newspapers, we see, hear, and read about leaders and politicians making decisions that are clearly wrong-headed and that seem to us, the horrified watchers, listeners, and readers, counterproductive. To be reasonably impartial about such blunders, we must try to put aside for the moment how the decision might affect us as individuals. What we are looking for are decisions that are contrary to the interests of their makers. A glaring historical example of such stupidity would be the respective attempts of Charles XII, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Hitler to invade Russia despite the disasters it brought each of their predecessors. Now, when investigating these matters, we must tread carefully and remember that it is wrong to judge the past by the ideas of the present. Computer viruses have been a fact of life at least since the 1980s, if not before. They can cause companies to lose hours of working time, and they can also spread panic among computer users everywhere. There are, however, several distinct types of computer infection, all loosely referred to as viruses, and they each work in a slightly different way. A particularly nasty one is the worm, which is a program designed to sneak its way into an entire computer network and reproduce itself over and over again. Then there is the Trojan, which strictly speaking isn't a virus, but a piece of software that appears to do one thing, but actually does something malicious instead. I use the word civilization now for the first time because before the Bronze Age there is nothing that we would define as civilization. Civilization involves the establishment of permanent dwelling areas that we call cities as opposed to villages. Agricultural villages will have existed all over the place in the Late Stone Age, in the Neolithic period, as it is known. But there is a difference, and the critical difference is that a city contains a number of people who do not provide for their own support. That is to say, they don't produce food. They need to acquire it from somebody else. When the unsuspecting operator introduces it into the computer, The alien program will take over the machine. With Trojans you have to be particularly careful because they can often be introduced by way of a message advertising an antivirus product. So what motivates someone to introduce a virus into the computer systems of innocent victims? Perhaps it's simply the desire to prove that it can be done. Or because it gives the kind of pleasure you get from solving a difficult problem. Nowadays people protect their computers with all sorts of security software, so it takes considerable skill to break through all the defenses and introduce a virus.
Land reclamation has been carried out along the coast of Tokyo Bay since the Meiji period. Areas along the shore, with a depth of less than 5 meters, are simplest to carry out landfill, and sand from the floor of Tokyo Bay is used for these projects. The topography of the shoreline of Tokyo Bay differs greatly from that of the pre-modern period, due to ongoing land reclamation projects. Tokyo Bay includes about 249 square kilometers of reclaimed land area in 2012. Aggregate household waste production is enormous in Greater Tokyo. There is little room for traditional garbage disposal sites. Waste is rigorously sorted at the household. Much of it is turned into ash and further recycled into bay landfill.
The proliferation of magazines and periodicals has also led to the proliferation of jobs in the field of journalism. There is no doubt that an ambitious man or woman possessing the necessary qualifications can find a suitable opening in the newspaper media. The career of a journalist demands a wide range of qualities and skills. There is no doubt that this career is highly rewarding, but a journalist has to work very hard for this. He has to know something about everything. The person who wants to reach the top has to master the techniques of journalism and go through the mill. He should also possess a flair for writing, sound judgment, personal integrity, earning for facts, and an expert knowledge of all branches of journalism. Revenue budget includes the government's revenue receipts and expenditure. There are two kinds of revenue receipts, tax and non-tax revenue. Revenue expenditure is the expenditure incurred on day-to-day functioning of the government and on various services offered to citizens. If revenue expenditure exceeds revenue receipts, the government incurs a revenue deficit. Capital budget includes capital receipts and payments of the government. Loans from public, foreign governments and RBI form a major part of the government's capital receipts. Capital expenditure is the expenditure on development of machinery. One of the most debatable and relevant issues in the contemporary times, sustainable development is becoming the need of the hour. Selfishly pursuing modernization, humans have frequently compromised with the requirements of a more sustainable environment. As a result, the increased environmental depletion is evident with the prevalence of deforestation, pollution, greenhouse gases, climate change, etc. The concept of sustainable development in India has even greater relevance due to controversy surrounding the big dams and mega projects and related long-term growth. Since it is quite a frequently asked topic in school tests as well as competitive exams, we are here to help you understand what this concept means as well as the mantras to drafting a well-written essay on sustainable development with format and examples. In library, debate class and in competitions, students get proper scope to improve their knowledge and style. Above all, in examinations they try to show their brilliant performance. Thus they get opportunity to expand their activity. School has definitely a healthy influence upon students. But some students indulge in bad company and get away from the impact of their teachers. Those students miss the charm of their school life. Teachers act as the guides and guardians to guide them on the right path. In school, teachers try to remove the evils from the students by sowing some seeds of good qualities in them. Subsequently, a punctual person works on time without any hindrance. The people who are employed in armies and navies are given rigorous training to become disciplined and punctual. They pay no heed to any circumstances, be it rain or thunder, they care about their punctuality. Furthermore, punctuality pushes the person to achieve success at faster rates than others. We must develop this quality in children from an early age, which will make it easy for everyone to lead a better life. When a person is punctual, they get utmost respect and admiration by society and reach greater heights than an unpunctual person. The probability is hard to calculate primarily because of the possibility of what are called common cause accidents, where the loss of off-site power and of on-site power are caused by the same thing. In this case, the earthquake and tsunami. We're hoping that all of the barriers to release of radioactivity will not fail. So far the first barrier, which is the fuel cladding, has apparently failed, because they are detecting cesium. We now have to hope that the subsequent layers, including primarily the containment building, will succeed in preventing release of major amounts of radioactivity.
If you are carrying out building work personally, it is very important that you understand how the building regulatory system and material applies to your situation, as you are responsible for making sure that the work complies with the building regulations. If you are employing a builder, the responsibility will usually be theirs, but you should confirm this at the very beginning. You should also bear in mind that if you are the owner of the building, it is ultimately you who may be served with an enforcement notice if the work does not comply with the regulations. Some kinds of building projects are exempt from the regulations, however generally, if you are planning to carry out building work as defined in Regulation 3 of the Building Regulations, then it must comply with the building regulations.
The Knowledge Challenge invites proposers to submit proposals for research activities aimed at improving our basic understanding of entrepreneurs, and the levers, tools and methods that can advance entrepreneurship in the United States. The Knowledge Challenge is open to proposers, conducting research in universities and academic institutions, laboratories, companies, non-profit organizations, and as individuals. Collaborations between academic researchers and entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship support programs, and other entrepreneurial ecosystem builders are welcome. The Knowledge Challenge may grant up to $400,000 annually for project teams, up to $150,000 annually for individual researchers, including hiring contract or research assistants, and up to $30,000 annually for students, or student teams, or doctoral researchers.
Understanding Migration, was conceived in response to numerous requests from educators and curriculum specialists concerning the presentation and discussion of issues related to human migration in the social studies classroom. What are the reasons that large groups of people have found themselves moving from place to place? What effects does this movement have? And most importantly, how can such a fluid and nebulous concept be presented in a classroom in an easy-to-follow manner with clear lesson objectives and outcomes? Regional case studies were chosen to address these and other essential questions. Where possible, we have used primary source documents to present the information in each case study.
Decision-making is central to the management of an enterprise. The manager of a profit-making business has to decide on the manner of implementation of the objectives of the business, at least one of which may well relate to allocating resources so as to maximize profit. A non-profit-making enterprise, such as Department of Central or Local Government, will be making decisions on resource allocation so as to be economical, efficient and effective in its use of finance. All organizations, whether in the private sector or the public sector, take decisions which have financial implications. Decisions will be about resources, which may be people, products, services or long-term and short-term investment. Decisions will also be about activities, including whether and how to undertake them. Most decisions will at some stage involve consideration of financial matters, particularly cost. There was also a broken thermometer in the cupboard, and he assumed that the vapor from the mercury had caused it. This meant it was now possible to reduce the time the plate was exposed from 8 hours to 30 minutes. This produced an image. The next step was to fix it, which he managed to do in 1837. He called this new process the daguerreotype, then advertised and looked for sponsors, but initially very few people were interested. The discovery was made public on January 1839, but details of the process were not given until August the same year, the French government in the meantime having bought the rights to the process. When a mosquito takes some blood from a human, she may also ingest Plasmodium. The parasite ends up in the insect's gut. The mosquito immune system jumps into action as the parasites try to push through the gut wall. Most parasites do get killed, but some manage to survive that gut migration. Then they replicate and move to the salivary glands, ready to infect the next person the mosquito bites. Researchers are tinkering with specific mosquito genes to see how they affect the development of the parasite. Their goal is to develop a genetically modified mosquito with a strengthened immune system that kills all the parasites.
Secure financial messaging services provider, SWIFT, said today that it has expanded the GPI tracker system to help banks track their global transactions at all times, keeping full vigil on the payments activity. Extension of its GPI tracker will cover all payment instructions sent across the network, SWIFT said in a statement. The introduction of the unique end-to-end transaction reference in all payment instructions will be effected through the mandatory annual standards update in November 2018. SWIFT GPI improves customer experience by increasing speed, transparency, and automatically provides status updates to all GPI banks involved in any GPI payment chain, it said.
People have been buzzing this week about a study from Johns Hopkins University on mosquitoes, genetically engineered to be resistant to malaria. The idea is to introduce the modified insects into an area affected by the disease and have them completely replace the native population. If the mosquitoes can't get infected, the logic goes, then the people they bite won't either. But to make that scheme work, transgenic mosquitoes need to outcompete the locals. So scientists at Johns Hopkins tested their ability to do this, by allowing equal numbers of resistant and non-resistant mosquitoes to feed on the blood of malaria-infected mice. After 9 generations, the transgenic mosquitoes made up 70% of the population.
In every recession, marketers find themselves in poorly charted waters, because no two downturns are exactly alike. However, in studying the marketing successes and failures of dozens of companies as they've navigated recessions from the 1970s onward, we've identified patterns in consumers' behavior and firm strategies that either propel or undermine performance. Companies need to understand the evolving consumption patterns and fine-tune their strategies accordingly. During recessions, of course, consumers set stricter priorities and reduce their spending. As sales start to drop, businesses typically cut costs, reduce prices, and postpone new investments. Marketing expenditures in areas from communications to research are often slashed across the board, but such indiscriminate cost-cutting is a mistake.